Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are back with more of our educational speedrun series. So without further ado, let's jump right into the action with a classic 10-minute rapid game.
Zooming through the game with a bomb cloud start, trashing all your prep like it's modern art. Knight on the rim, he'll still find the win. Chat's going wild, bro thinks he's Hikaru again. Oh hey, hey, he's smurfing play-by-play, beats you blindfolded, still sipping latte. Queens are flying, eagles meet defeat, just another speed run on Hikaru Street.
First game of the session, we're going to start with the move pawn to e4. Now, I haven't done many videos recently. Our rating is near 1400 at this point, so players again should be able to survive the openings, but let's see what we get. So we get knight f3 and queen to f6. It's a very strange move in the opening. I think it's playable perhaps, but it's a very risky decision to bring the queen out early, because when I develop my knight, I have this very big threat to fork the queen and the pawn. Okay, my opponent plays c6, stopping this jump. But now I can play d4, and there's very quick development here in the center of the board with the bishop and the knight and the queen coming out. And already I think that I'm probably much better. So we get the move pawn takes pawn. Now, there are a couple different options here which I'm going to consider. The first one is to push the pawn. The second one is to move my bishop here. I could play queen takes pawn or knight takes pawn. If I play queen takes, black will simply trade. If I take with the knight, I haven't really been able to take advantage of my opponent bringing the queen out early. Here, black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces on the back rank which aren't developed. So generally when your opponent brings the queen out earlier, they've only developed one piece. You want to see if you can avoid a simple trade down of pieces, because that will be a way of letting your opponent off the hook and not punishing them for their mistakes. So let's think about this. E5 is a move, bishop g5 is a move. Now both moves seem very reasonable. Honestly, I'm not sure which one's even better, but I'm going to play e5, and the reason I'm going to play e5 here is that the knight guards the pawn, so I'm attacking the queen. Queen has to go, and by pushing e5 here, black will be unable to develop any of these pieces. This pawn really restricts the development of black pieces here. So because black doesn't have easy development, that's why I'm going to choose this move here. We get queen g6. I'm going to take the pawn here, and basically black can never bring this knight out. You can't develop this bishop. Both these squares are covered by the queen here. My arrow drawing skills aren't up to snuff today, so the bishop and the knight can't easily be developed, whereas this pawn really does clamp down on the dark squares. Now we get the move queen takes c2, and my opponent is promptly, I think, ready to resign the game after bishop d3, as now the queen is simply trapped here. I'm guarding every piece on the board. This is going to be GG very quickly. So you get the move c5, one of the only moves to try and not lose the game on the spot. I'm going to move my queen. I think I'm going to go to e3 here. The queen just guards the bishop. Everything's guarded still. Queen has no escape square. Knight covers the pawn. So the queen remains trapped. There's no way for black to attack my queen. So this means the queen on c2 is going to fall on the next turn. Now, my opponent has not made a move yet. Maybe my opponent's sitting there. They're very unhappy with the position, so they don't want to simply resign the game. Okay, we get queen takes knight. I'll take back. Now the main goal is just to develop quickly. My opponent still actually, as we look at this position, has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces. Every piece except the queen, which black brought out at the very start of the game, has not been developed. So I should be able to attack this king very quickly, having finished my kingside development. Maybe bishop c4, knight g5, queen f4. Going to try to end this game as quickly as possible here. So let's go bishop c4 here, really trying to spy this weak pawn on f7 here, hit this pawn with a knight potentially. Should be pretty easy to win this within the next 3 or 4 moves. Okay, let's go knight g5, attack this pawn immediately before my opponent can finish any of the development. Okay, so we get the move knight to f5. Now here I'm going to play the move queen to f4, simply attacking the knight. I'm still attacking this pawn on f7. Don't want to hang the queen here, so that's why I move the queen up. So we get g6 here. I think I'm going to take the pawn here. The knight is guarded by the bishop. I'm attacking the rook here. Really what I'm trying to do is end this game as quickly as possible. It's not very interesting either for myself or you guys viewers at home, because this game is pretty much over here. I'm going to go knight d6 here, just trying to end it immediately. What I want is my opponent to trade a piece off here, because it's going to open up a file for me to attack this king on this e8 square. So I'll take with the pawn. I still have rook e1 to hit the king, trying to get the immediate checkmate. Let's go check, hit the king, king d8. I can play I'm going to go for a very cool checkmate here. So I'm going to play queen to h4 check. Now this is actually a temporary Botez gambit, but it's going to lead to a really beautiful checkmate when my opponent takes the queen. See what we get. Waiting for the move here. This should be a really beautiful checkmate, but let's see. Oh, my opponent does not actually take the queen. That's really annoying. Okay, well in that case, okay, I guess I'll just take the knight. Take the knight. Take the rook. I have bishop f4. I'll even just pre-move it, try to end the game immediately. There's no mate in one, so I'll go here and then checkmate. Okay, GG. Okay, so we get a pretty smooth win in the first game. As we take a look at the game, one of the things I really like in these videos is going over the game briefly. Now, it's very important if you're at an intermediate level, even beginner level, you try to memorize some opening strategies. And if your opponent does something that you're unfamiliar with, very specifically like in this game, where your opponent brings out a queen very early, you generally want to think about, is there a way to punish that from the get-go? So specifically, when I spoke about this position during the game, I mentioned e5 or bishop g5. Now there is nothing wrong with knight takes d4 or queen takes d4, but were I to play queen takes d4 after black trades here and plays a move like d6, black is going to be able to develop the pieces very quickly. Now I know that the computer gives white a big edge anyway, but at the intermediate level you won't be able to take advantage of this. And when we reach a position like this in this middle game, black has to finish the development very quickly, and you've let black off the hook here, because even if you don't know for a fact this is a blunder, it's something very unorthodox. And when your opponent does something that's unorthodox that goes against the basic rules, like bringing a queen out early, you generally want to see if you can take advantage of that and get a big advantage early in the game. So that's why I played e5 here, and now I took with the pawn. Very specifically, when we reach this position, say I were to have played bishop g5 here, for example, and black plays a move like queen to d6 here. Again, I don't want to trade the queens because we're in the end game. So say here I were to take with a knight. Now black can play knight f6, trying to go bishop e7 and castle very quickly. White is still much better, if not winning technically, but there isn't a clear-cut way to really end the game instantly, at least not at the intermediate level. So that's why I like e5, because I would say it's something like 90% of games that feature e4, e5, the knight is going to go to f6. Black will probably put a knight on c6, but I would say almost always black is going to bring a knight to f6. So for example, say black were to play with like knight c6 takes, and say you play something like this, just as a sample line here. Black usually wants to bring the knight to f6 here, but if black goes knight f6, there's e5 kicking the knight away. But the knight is always aiming for the square, and I don't know why I use this as the example here. Someone who's really strong, move the bishop and develop the knight, but the knight always wants to go to f6 in these e4, e5 pawn structures. So that's why I was to go for it in the game when I play e5 and take. Now the knight will have to go to e7 here. This bishop can't go to c5 because I capture, or b4 where I capture, so the bishop can't develop easily. Knight can't go to f6 either. If black plays knight e7 here, which is another move, probably I would develop the bishop and try to castle his queen, king out of the center right away if possible. Instead, we got queen c2, and after bishop d3, queen e3 here, queen is trapped, every piece is guarded here, every square is covered. This is simply game over, and of course I go on to win very shortly. So the main moral of the story about this game is that you'll, as a beginner or an intermediate player, you probably memorize some openings. If your opponent does something that looks a little bit weird, like bringing a queen out early very specifically, or for example, say your opponent does another opening, say your opponent does something like, I'm just going to set up a position, they start playing all kinds of like pawn moves, for example. This is a hyper modern setup, but when your opponent does this, you want to have a general idea of what you're aiming for, and you want to try to punish it. When your opponent pushes pawns forward like this, for example, generally you want to develop your pieces very quickly and look to open up the center of the board if possible, before your opponent has time to push all these pawns up the board and go 1 2 3 4 5 and finish the development. So pretty straightforward first game. Let's move on to the next one. Here we go. Now we get the black pieces, and let's see what my opponent chooses to play here. So we get e4. Now I could play e5. I think I'm going to go back to my Sicilians once again. I really do like the Sicilian. We get f4 here. Now this is actually an opening that you might see fairly frequently at an beginner or intermediate level with this f4 push. Normally your opponent will play knight c3, and because of that, I'm going to show why this move is not the best move here, which is that I'm going to play the move d5. Normally white will play knight c3 and then f4, and very specifically by playing knight c3 you prevent this d5 pawn thrust, whereas when you play f4 on move 2, black can try to strike in the center right away. So I'm going to go knight to f6 here. This is the best move according to the computer. Queen takes pawn is also fine. I'll explain a little bit about why I'm not going to play queen takes after the game ends, but let's play knight f6 here. So we get bishop c4. I can simply take, queen guards the knight here. Now we have even material, pretty standard stuff. we got the move queen to f3. Now, it's funny that after the previous game where I mentioned your opponent doing something unorthodox you're not ready for, my opponent does the same thing. Now, unfortunately, in this case, it's a little bit different because my opponent has only one piece in the way of castling the king and the rook here, which is the knight. So the knight can recapture or the knight can go to e2. So if I move the queen and the knight moves and white castles, white finishes development. So what I mentioned about something unorthodox, unusual, I can't really punish it right away because my opponent is so close to finishing this development here. So now let's think about this. Do I want to trade the queens or not? Now, if I were playing a high level game at the top level, I would exchange the queens here. And the reason I would exchange the queens is that in the long run, in an end game where I have the bishop pair, the two bishops are generally better than a bishop and a knight combination. But at a beginner, intermediate level, frankly, even a master level, that is something that is completely irrelevant. It's a positional theme, positional understanding that just doesn't matter whatsoever. So in this case, I'm not actually going to do that. Instead, I'm going to play the move queen to d6 here, try and develop my knight and my bishop very, very quickly. So we get d3. Okay, let's develop the knight. Maybe knight d4 here to fork the queen and the pawn. c3. And now we go bishop to f5. Queen and the bishop target this pawn. I can also castle my king very quickly to the queen side. And very, very quickly, this game has gone downhill for my opponent. So now we get the move pawn to d4. If I take, there's just a free pawn. So I think I will just take the pawn. Why not? I have queen and a knight in case white takes. Also, my opponent has not developed any piece here. These pieces are still stuck on the back rank. So I think I can take, hitting the queen. I also have knight c2 to fork the king and the rook here. This actually looks very, very scary for my opponent. Might just be losing, in fact. Let's see what we get here. Let's go check. Fork the king and the rook. Note my rook is hanging in the corner pocket, so I will have to move the rook on the next turn. But now this rook is just stuck. The rook can't move anywhere. It's completely glued in this corner square here. So with the rook completely glued here, I'm going to take the rook and I should win the game on the next move or two. Queen b5 hits the bishop, hits the king. Just drop the bishop. Queen guards the bishop. Bishop hits the queen. Rook is still hanging, so I can capture on the next turn. So we get queen c4. I guess knight's under attack. I could play rook c8 here. Bishop guards the rook to hit the queen, but it's free material. There's nothing. I'm guarding the pawn. Nothing's hanging. Let's just take the free material here and go from there. Bishop e3. So here we're up a rook, but we have a little bit of a lack of development. Now, again, I'm up material, so I can probably be very aggressive and ignore the king side, which is what I'm going to do here. E6, bishop e7, and castles also completely fine just to get the king out of the middle of the board. But because my opponent has this weak king and all these pieces on the back rank, I feel like trying to punish immediately. Okay, let's go rook c2. There's just knight d2. So let's go knight c2. Bring this knight back. I'll just trade the knight for the bishop. Try to simplify the game here. My opponent has no pieces near my king. So with nothing near this king, I'm actually going to go into simplification mode of just trading off all the pieces here. Let's go queen b6. Try to force a trade of the queens. Now I've just moved the bishop, move the pawn, move the bishop, get the king out of the middle of the way. I have an extra tower here. 2 towers versus 1. Let's go e6. Let's go bishop b4, get rid of the pony, just try to liquidate all the material here immediately. Oops, there goes the rook. Let's just castle the king, no reason not to here on the next turn. So now I'm just going to try to use the rooks on the open files, just too much material here. Should be very, very easy to convert. Let's go here. Now I'll get rid of one of these knights. I'm actually just going to give up the rook here. I'm not worried about it, just because now my opponent has nothing but pawns on the board. The only pawns, very easy. There's only this one pawn threat, so now it's just a matter of locking up everything. Let's go here. Let's go here. Start pushing the pawns. This takes. Push the pawn. Very easy, just checkmate. Okay, so my opponent resigns the game, so let's take a look at it. So in this opening, when you play Sicilian, one of the biggest reasons white plays knight c3, which is what is known as the Grand Prix attack, is no matter how black responds, let's say pawn d6, knight c6, a6, g6, whatever the move might be, white usually will play the move pawn to f4 on the third move here, and black can't actually play the move pawn to d5, because if you were to go d5, white simply takes the pawn. Same thing right here. Say you were to go d5, white just takes the pawn, drops the knight back, and white has one extra pawn on the board. So normally white wants to play knight c3 before f4 for this reason, because when you go f4, now black can play d5, and here I play knight f6. Worth noting, so it's probably thinking, well, why didn't you just take the pawn on d5? Now this is probably not going to be a really important opening theoretically at the lower levels of chess, so I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but if I were to take with the queen here, white can bring the knight out to f3 followed by knight c3, bishop b5 very quickly, like say knight f6, knight c3, bishop b5, let's say bishop d7, queen e2 or something, e6, and now white castles here. There might even be an f5 or knight e5 here, and it's a very, very easy position for white to play. So that's why I don't take with the queen. I don't want to give white time to develop the knight and attack the queen and everything else bad that comes along with it. So I play knight to f6. Now someone's probably wondering, can't white go pawn to c4 simply guarding the pawn, as I would lose a knight in the game? If white were to play c4, black will go e6, and after takes, knight f3, and then move knight c6 here. Due to these backward pawns here, black is actually better. Say white goes d3, black plays something like queen c7, knight c3, black castles. There's a lot of pressure immediately on the central d file. Let's just say white were to move the queen to c2 here. Now black can play knight b4, hitting the queen of the pawn, and very, very quickly, out of nowhere, white is actually going to lose the game, as white has 1 2 3 4 5 6 pieces on the original squares. This turns into a complete disaster. Say white were to play a move like b3, for example, black can go g6 and bishop g7 here to hit this diagonal. There's rook e8 as well. White is in all kinds of trouble. So that's usually why white doesn't play the move pawn to c4 here. Probably after c4 e6, white could still try to play something like knight to f3 takes and finish the development here. It was like bishop c4 again, but as you can tell from the valuation bar, computer gives black a big advantage. All right, so here we got bishop to c4. This isn't best. Bishop b5 probably slightly better in this position, and after takes in a position like this, just knight f3, knight d5, and knight e5, and black's maybe still slightly better, but the game goes on. White will be able to develop, play d3, knight c3. It's going to be a complex middle game. Instead, we got bishop c4. I take, we get takes, and now this is a very important point. Now, if I were playing a top level game here, I would trade the queens, play the move knight to c6. White would probably go d3, and then I would play something like bishop to g4, maybe knight to b4 as well. And very, very quickly here, I would argue that with the two bishops, black is better. But this is something that, again, the bishop pair and understanding how to use them does not apply to any level below, I would say, international master, maybe master level perhaps. But it's something which is going to be irrelevant to 99.99% of people who watch this video. So I wouldn't worry about it. But it is worth noting that the bishop pair versus, say, a bishop and a knight combination, generally the two bishops are considered better because bishops have unimpeded diagonals to hit. So for example, in this position, I have this light square bishop. White does not have a light square bishop. So say I were able to put a bishop on e6 here, this bishop to some degree is unimpeded. Conversely, however, so say we were at a position like this with the same color bishops, white can try to go bishop c3 and blunt the power of this bishop on this long diagonal here. So that's why the bishop pair is so powerful, because there's one bishop which white can try to oppose, but the other bishop is always going to have a free diagonal somewhere to line up a bunch of threats. Okay, so back to the game. I play queen d6, d3. This is a mistake. Probably knight to e2. Trying to simply finish the development would have been best. After g6, knight c3, and bishop g7, followed by castles. Black has an advantage here. Maybe b6 is actually better. And we reach a similar position here where after bishop b7, you'll notice it's the same issue. The two bishops are very, very powerful on both of the diagonals here. And very specifically, this bishop on b7 cannot easily be opposed. In fact, it can't be opposed at all. So you get king h1, queen d7, just to illustrate. I can move the knight, and I've got this awesome diagonal for this great bishop here on b7. So we get d3. Go here, c3, bishop f5. Probably again knight e2 would have been best, but now I think knight b4, maybe knight b4, knight e3, and white's still holding the game. Again, knight e2 trying to finish this kingside development would have been the right play. We get c3, and after bishop f5, immediately this pawn's under attack. If white plays, I don't know, king e2 like Le Bon Cloud, black castles. Now there's a double stack, massive pressure. White is completely lost, also because again you have 1 2 3 4 5 pieces that white can't develop. So we get c3. I play bishop f5, d4, takes, check. I play rook d8 here, block, and now I take the rook. Pretty straightforward. Take the rook. Okay, at this point I just trade everything down. Rest is very, very basic. So let's move on to the next game. Here we go. Next game, we got the white pieces. Again, I'm going to play e4 here. Get e5. Let's go knight to f3. Attack the pawn. Knight c6. Okay. Now, in this game, I'm going to play the Ruy Lopez. I would say of the possible openings that I would suggest here, I think the Scotch is my number one for beginner intermediate. I think Ruy Lopez is number two. Italian, if you play early c3 d4, is reasonable. Those are probably the only three openings I would play if you reach this position from the white side. So let's go bishop b5 here. So wow, we get queen f6. This is a second game where my opponent's brought a queen out very early. So I'm going to go c3, try to build this big white center immediately. Let's go d4. Let's see if we can punish my opponent for not bringing bringing the queen out super early. Now h6 is a very logical move because it actually stops bishop g5 here. Let's take back. I'm guarding the pawn with the knight and the queen. I have these two pawns here, the big white center. We got bishop b4. Let's develop the knight here. Pawn guards the knight. So we get knight g to e7. Very logical move. I'm going to castle here. I assume my opponent will probably castle if I had to guess. Although, as we're about to see, there are going to be some serious problems here with this knight, because I'm going to be able to attack this knight very, very easily, I think, in the next move or two. There's d5, there's e5 here. Okay, let's go e5. Attack the queen. Try to play in the center of the board very, very quickly here. Before black can... Actually, I would say the big issue for black here is this light square bishop. You can't easily bring it to the game. Black could get d6 and bishop f5 or bishop g4, bishop to h3 here, for example. This bishop could become very valuable, but black is still one move away from being able to bring the bishop into the game. This is already actually very, very tough to play. We get knight f5 here. So how do I want to play this? Now, knight to h4 is a move that would win the game in the long term. I'm trying to figure out if I have a way to win the game quicker. I don't actually see a quicker way, so I think I'll just do it here. Now, if black takes the knight, you lose the queen. If black moves the queen, you lose the knight. So I assume my opponent will take the knight. And then the bishop, let's see if that's what happens. So you get queen to e6 instead. Now I just take, bishop guards the knight. I'm threatening to fork the king and the queen. At this point, the game is basically over. I take, fork the king and the queen. This is going to be a very quick GG here. The bright side about winning this game quickly is now we have time for one more game in this video. This opening, I would say, again, main issue for my opponent was that the queen was out too early and the queen got into a lot of trouble. This is why you don't want to bring the queen out very, very early. So I think that's probably the main theme of this video. So let's go for one more game. Let's see if we can get a trifecta here of my opponent bringing out a queen early. Now we got c5. We don't get an e4 e5 system, so it's very unlikely that will happen, but oh well. Okay, so let's play the Grand Prix attack. Now this is something that I really have liked a lot. I play f4 here. Now I'm going to go knight to f3, knight to f6. Okay, and here I'm going to play the move a4, trying to stop black from pushing this pawn to b5 here. If I were to bring the bishop out right away, there would be b5. So let's go bishop c4. This is slightly inaccurate, but I'm not convinced my opponent will be able to punish me for it. So let's see. Okay, we do get d5, which is actually a great move, but the opening shouldn't matter that much. I get the bishop on the diagonal here with the bishop and the knight hitting this pawn. I'm going to castle my king next turn. Okay, so I'm going to castle, of course. We'll get castles. Now I'm going to play d4, trying to really create some chaos here in the center of the board. We get c4, which is actually a very good move. So what I'm going to play here is this bishop is now walled in by the pawns. And what I'm going to go for is I'm going to try to put this bishop on this long diagonal here. I'm going to try to go c3 and bishop to b1 here to reroute it, because I can't really do anything against these two pawns here. There's no way to break the structure of the pawns, and this bishop is actually very bad. So I'm going to try to reroute everything. So I'm going to go knight to g3, and the reason I'm going to play knight g3 first is that if I were to play c3 here, black can put the bishop on f5. So when I go knight g3, I take away the square, and now I'm free to put this bishop on this diagonal here. And actually, I think I might already be much, much better, because these knights combined with this big threat on the diagonal is going to lead to a serious situation. So let's go here. So I put this great bash in here that's supported by the pawns. I'm about to go bishop to b1. This is already a position I think is frankly extremely hard for black to play, because this knight is all up in the business here, supported by the pawns. I've got all kinds of threats on diagonals, knight f5, knight h5. And I think my opponent's in serious trouble already. Also worth noting, this is a bastion. You can't easily remove it. Black could move the knight and push a pawn. You could maybe remove it, but with all these threats on the diagonal, if you ever move the knight, probably something really, really bad is going to happen on this square. So you can't easily move the knight because of this issue, and then that means these pawns and this knight are just incredibly dominant in this position. My only issue here is I have this rook on a1 that's not really in the game yet. Bishop can easily be developed, both these bishops for that matter, but this rook isn't super active at the moment, so it's maybe the one issue that I have. But most of my focus here in this game is going to definitely be on the king side. Maybe knight to h5 here is an idea to try to bring the queen and then swing a rook into the game. Like if I can trade, I hit this pawn, knight h5, takes, and rook f3, bring the rook into the game. So I have an idea that if I can get these two pieces over here, I should be winning. So let's try to achieve that game plan. So we get the move knight to h7. So my opponent is actually trying to play f6, which is very, very commendable. What do I want to do here? I could play queen c2, setting up the battery. Actually, I could also... Actually, this is just a free pawn. I want to find a spectacular way to win those, so I'm actually not going to go for this takes, and winning a pawn. I'm going to be very creative here. I'm going to go knight to h5. I'm going to try to really hit on these two pawns here. Try to bring the rook up, maybe queen c2 as well. I'm going to try to win this in spectacular fashion versus just something very boring and simplistic. We get g6 here. I expected that. I'm going to play rook to f3, trying to lift my rook here to attack on the g file. This is somewhat speculative, but I think it works. If black takes, I have rook g3 check. I guess I'll pre-move in case my opponent decides to take the knight. Okay, so we get pawn takes. So let's go check. Hit the king. King. Oh, that's just checkmate. What was that? That's very, very weird. Okay, that's definitely not how I was hoping to end this, but okay, let's go back to the opening. Now, my opponent played a very creative order, and the problem with the order my opponent played is that generally when your opponent plays this order, it's very hard to develop the bishop. In the Grand Prix, what you'd love ideally is to get something like this, where you can put the bishop on either b5 or c4, followed by d3, creating the chain, develop the knight and the king, something like this, for example, knight f3 and castles. This is the standard development with this chain of 3 and the bishop. But the way my opponent played here, if I go bishop c4, there's b5, so I played a4, and then he played e6. Now, if your opponent plays like this, I played bishop c4 anyway, hoping to get the standard setup. But normally if your opponent's threatening both b5 and d5, what you're supposed to do is play d4 and open up the center of the board like this and develop the bishop and castle the king. I tried to be creative instead with bishop c4. My opponent correctly played d5, played bishop e7, and now we got to move c4, which isn't maybe a huge mistake in reality. If this were a game between two amateurs, this move probably is completely fine, but unfortunately against me it wasn't fine because I knew the exact idea to play against it. But the computer actually wants black to trade and go bishop c5 and then knight c6 here with like bishop g4, and very, very quickly black has a lot of play on the king side here. A lot of stuff is happening, and white has a lot of pieces. Bishop is very passive versus the pawn chain. Rook's not in the game, bishop's not in the game. These three pieces combine to give black a serious advantage. In fact, actually computer says black is just winning. So we get c4. Now I play here. Main point being, if I go something like b3 and black gets bishop b4 and then b5 here, this bishop is completely walled in by the pawns. I have no way to activate the bishop on this diagonal. If for example I could get a pawn here and chip, like pawn here to chip the structure maybe, then it would be possible, but I can't really break the structure of these two pawns. So therefore with this bishop, that's why I look for the idea to reroute it. I go here, not c3 of course, because then after bishop to f5, apparently white's still better, but I'm not going to get this position where I can have the bishop on the long diagonal without black being able to trade the bishops. So I go knight g3, I cut off this bishop f5 move, we get knight rook e8, bishop d6, knight e5, and now after bishop b1, it's just a very, very tough position to play because everything is aiming towards the king side. This knight can't really be taken if black takes and plays like knight d7. Queen f3 here hitting the pawns. There's also something like there's even something like queen h5 and maybe some big sacks here as well, like say black was queen e7. Probably you can just sack, and this is just completely crushing here. So black can't really trade for this knight here, and then I have all this time to start attacking here. So we get knight h7. if my opponent were to play knight a5, which is probably the best move, I'd move my bishop, move my rook here, and computer wants a5 here. And now after knight to h5, apparently rook to a6 is the best move. Trying to activate this rook. This is pretty deep, honestly, not what I would expect. But the main point here is if black were to trade and go like queen f6, now you can play g4, g5 with these two bishops, the queen, the rook, and the knight here. Everything is perfectly placed here, perfect harmony, and white is probably winning the game. Instead, we get knight h7. I play knight h5. Of course, computer wants white to just take and win this position with the extra pawn. Queen h5 is looming here to finish the game. If g6, there's f5 here. Suddenly the f file opens up, all kinds of big problems. Black can't survive. So that would have been best, but I wanted to be fancy, so I go knight h5. I go rook f3. Apparently, this is a blunder. Black can trade here and go bishop g4, pinning the rook and the queen. And after knight g3, knight g5, apparently black is a little bit better. So this wasn't maybe the best approach. I got a little bit too flashy here. But my opponent took, I checked. King h8 is mate in 1. After bishop g4 here, takes in this position, I can simply take. If king h8, it's mate in 1. If you get knight g5 here, I can simply play the move bishop to d2, stopping the check and taking the knight on the next turn. And after king to f8 here, I can simply go check. King e7, take the knight. And at this point with rook e3, coming the king kind of on the loose here, I should be able to bring these pieces to center. 1, 2, 3. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. So I get this win in this game. It ends rather prematurely, but this game was one of the better games I would say that I've seen recently in this speed run. So it was a good try by my 1400 rated opponent in this game. Ultimately, we do end up on top in all these situations. So the moral from this video is going to be, don't bring your queen out early. That's going to be the biggest theme of this video. Don't bring your queen out early if you can help it. But if your opponent does that, you're on the other side of it. Remember that something seems a little bit off. Think about the themes. We always learn as beginners that you don't want to bring the queen out early because it can be attacked. So think about that. Think about those basic themes when you see something that's off in the opening and try to take advantage of it if possible versus just playing normal developing moves. Now, more often than not, it's not going to exist, but there are situations like in these games where you can take advantage. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this latest edition of our educational speedrun series. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with more great educational speedrun content in the very near future. Hope you guys enjoyed it and have a great rest of your day. See you. Bye.